something hits the windshield and your trailer door flew open. Towing was our only option. I would consider this the road trip from hell. Good morning, Fearless fam. Today I want to share a story with you of an adventure gone mostly wrong. This is the story of the time my husband and I, before we were married, before we were engaged, we drove from Southern California to North Carolina. I want to tell you guys all about the travels that I went on before I started vlogging. One of the most memorable travel experiences that I think I've ever had was this really awful cross-country road trip that I went on with Eric. I was blogging at the time, which is kind of funny. If you go to, this is a really long blog title, Lauren and Eric Coast to Coast.blogspot.com. Yeah, that's right. I made my own blog just for this particular trip. I don't think I've ever gone back and read through this whole thing, so it's kind of fun for me to go through these blog posts, but I'm just gonna go day by day, read little bits of my blog posts, share some photos, and explain why I would consider this the road trip from hell. But you know what? After this trip, I did know, I knew for certain that I was going to marry Eric. Time for curry and my story about this insane road trip. Alright, so we gotta start at day 0. So before the trip, what we had planned was actually quite a lot. It was a really full itinerary and it all went to shit within the first few days. So at the time, Eric and I were living in Oxnard, California, right next to the beach. The reason we went on this road trip was to move his truck that he had at the time from the West Coast to the East Coast. So straight from my blog, back from November 14th, 2012, this is what I said we had planned for our road trip. First stop is the Grand Canyon, then El Paso to spend time with Eric's brother. After that, we'll be headed to Austin for a big music event. The next night will be more relaxed since we'll be staying at a bed and breakfast close to Bourbon Street in New Orleans. The rest of the trip is unplanned except for getting to North Carolina in time for Thanksgiving. None of this went well. So the first day of the trip, the early morning all the way into the afternoon, was actually spent moving Eric out of his room in that condo that he was living in at the time. So the first night we drove for a couple hours and ended up in Barstow, California. We woke up early to leave Barstow, drove by Vegas and waved hello, because that's actually the city Eric and I met in. And we saw the Hoover Dam, and then we arrived at Grand Canyon Ranch. When we arrived at Grand Canyon Ranch, I remember we were greeted by this guy who called himself Cowboy Dave. And he was really over the top, friendly, borderline invasive, but he was insanely entertaining. The Grand Canyon Ranch is actually, it's supposed to be an old Wild West theme. So everybody is dressed in themed costumes, and you can choose to stay in a teepee or a cabin. We chose the cabin. And it was inexpensive and close to where we wanted to be. So because of our road trip route, we actually ended up in Grand Canyon West. So Wednesday, November 14th, we had all this stuff planned out, right? This is Friday, November 16th. Shit already goes bad. So we dropped our bags at Grand Canyon Ranch, we waved goodbye to Cowboy Dave, and we drove up an incredibly bumpy, back road, stop for the cows kind of a road, up to Grand Canyon West. So in addition to Eric's truck, we also had a U-Haul trailer. As soon as we parked the truck, someone was running up to us with a bag that was super torn up, ripped at the sides, super dirty, really crappy, and it was my bag. And he said, "Hey, we were driving behind you on the road and your trailer door flew open and a bunch of stuff came out." So here's what happened. I'm gonna read it off my blog. I found out that I had latched the trailer incorrectly, which had caused 3 bags and a box to fly out the back. A nice man collected 2 out of 4. One of them was my bag full of all the clothes I have for the next month and Eric's bag of shoes and belts, both of which were really banged up. The box was unimportant, so the real loss was my mom's big 1990 Diane von Furstenberg luggage that was mostly empty, but I'm pretty sure it had my favorite postcards from those that I've collected on my travels through the US and Europe. We filed a missing item report and there's only one road, so there's a good chance it'll turn up. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Deep breath, moving on. The 2 bags that were the most important were recovered, but in order to open my luggage, I remember I had to actually cut it open because the zipper had gotten banged into itself, so it wouldn't function anymore. So I literally had to rip it open in order to access the clothes inside. I don't even know what I did with it. I'm sure I threw it away pretty quickly. The Diane von Furstenberg bag. I don't know if I have a picture of this. Maybe I do from when I was in Ireland because I took this bag to Ireland too. But this bag, I'm laughing because this bag is a freaking massive beast. And the Diane von Furstenberg bag was found about a week later. So they ended up shipping it to me, and I don't know how I didn't get charged for that. It must be in the national park budget, but it was $75 to ship that thing, and they shipped it for me. So that was really, really awesome. So I got it all back. Believe it or not, that bag is still kicking. Like, that thing worked. The thing worked after that whole incident. It's a beast. So basically we were already in a mode where it was like, wow, shit just got really wrong. Like, things just happened so fast. So we are kind of mentally recovered. We walk into the office for Grand Canyon West, which is owned by the Hualapai tribe. Turns out it's a huge tourist trap. In order to see the Grand Canyon from that spot, you cannot drive up there by yourself. You have to take their shuttle, and it's $45 a person. So we were really disappointed that we've spent like $90 to take a freaking shuttle just to go look at the Grand Canyon. But once we saw it, we were both just like, my heart like stopped and my eyes got big, and I thought I was gonna cry because it was so beautiful. The shuttle took us to 2 different viewing spots. I think one was called Eagle Point and one was called Guano Point, and it was great. But to be honest, we walk up to the Grand Canyon, we see it, we're like in awe, we take our pictures, and then we're standing there like, now what? Guess we get back on the bus. So it was a really short-lived like Grand Canyon trip. I really want to go hike in the Grand Canyon. I want to go to the east side of the canyon next time, but let's go back to the story. So basically, here's the situation. Hualapai tribe area is up here. Grand Canyon is up here. You have to go down a dirt road, then you're at Grand Canyon Ranch. There's pretty much nothing else in the area. So guess where we ate? At the Hualapai Reservation, of course. It was $15 per person for dinner, and it was served to us on a styrofoam plate. It was like cafeteria quality food in a huge portion, and we sat at like basically picnic tables that were indoors. And here was my favorite part, because you gotta have a good sense of humor in situations like this. There was the 2 of us, and then a group of like maybe 3 or 4, like a family, sitting like on the other side. So this is a huge area to like sit and eat, and there's like 2 groups there. There's a country singer, but here's the weird one. There was a freaking magician there. So the magician was going up to everybody who was there. So the 2 tables at the restaurant just going back and forth doing weird magic tricks, and it was the weirdest thing ever. And I didn't tip him because I was like, I spent too much money here, dude. I'm not gonna tip you on top of all this. Also, why is there a magician in the Hualapai Reservation? So we've got our tattered bags in the back. I properly locked the trailer this time, drove back down that bumpy, dirty road. We arrived at the ranch. There were ponies, there were teepees, there were covered wagons. We were staying in the tiniest cabin ever, and there was a cowboy singing by a campfire. The cowboy singing by the campfire was a little much for us, so we actually just went in our cabin and laid in bed together and read the Grand Canyon Ranch brochure and laughed our asses off and had a great night. Driving through Arizona was actually really, really awesome. And I might be going back there soon. So we packed up, left super early in the morning from Grand Canyon Ranch, and the plan that day was to drive 12 hours to El Paso, Texas. And then the real kicker of the whole trip happened. Alright, so we're driving on Highway 93, and I remember looking off to the side and passing a sign that said nothing, and I thought it was so funny I started cracking up. There was literally nothing for miles. We hadn't seen any like towns or gas stations or anything for like an hour. I'm gonna read it off my blog. We noticed there was a weird rattling sound when we were driving, about 2 or 3 hours from Grand Canyon West, which gradually sounded worse and worse, and there was a lot of white smoke coming out of the exhaust. We pulled over, called some people to pick their brains about it, and decided to drive to an auto repair shop familiar with diesel, which was in Wickenburg. Oh yeah, this was a diesel truck, by the way. Before long, there was thick white smoke billowing out of the exhaust pipe, and we lost power. It took Eric a lot of effort to steer us over to the side of the road. We get out of the truck, look at the side, and there is this black gross stuff splattered all over the trailer. I remember a cop came by and stopped, and just to make sure we were okay and make sure that we didn't need any water or anything. So I thought that was really, really awesome that happened. It made me feel a little more comfortable. Towing was our only option, and being 50 miles away from the tow company and the auto shop and having a 12-foot U-Haul trailer made it an expensive tow job. On the whole ride down in the tow truck, we heard horrifying story after horrifying story of the worst accidents the tow truck driver had ever witnessed. We arrived in Wickenburg to realize everyone here knows each other. The lady at the auto shop said the Best Western down the street had rooms available. We grabbed our necessities, walked to the hotel, and then headed straight to the Mexican restaurant for margaritas. So basically, we ended up in this tiny little cowboy town called Wickenburg, Arizona. We decided not to get a rental car. All we could do was wait at that point. I remember the first day they said, we'll call you. We came back the next day. We basically went there every day just to get a little update, because what else were we going to do? And I remember we went back and they were like, we don't have a diagnosis yet, blah, blah, blah. And then we went back another day and they said, we have a diagnosis. The turbo blew out and he had to replace something. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about cars, but it took a long time. It was really expensive. What did we do when we were in Wickenburg? That's a great question. What's the population of Wickenburg? Oh, it was 6,000 people. So that should give you an idea of how big this town is. In my blog post, here's a gem of a paragraph. Today was spent the Wickenburg way. We went to a local, in parentheses, 4 doors away from the hotel, greasy spoon type restaurant for breakfast. The small place was packed, mostly with folks decked out in Harley Davidson gear. So the 80-something-year-old waitress seated us at a table with one of the biker couples. So Wickenburg is the kind of place where the restaurants are really small, and if there's too many people, they'll just start seating people at the same tables. So like they'll just crunch people together at tables. They told us the history of the cafe, pointed out the owners, one was the 80-something-year-old woman, and informed us that they had the best biscuits and gravy in the whole nation. When it came time to order, we added on biscuits and gravy, just a half order. Then the waitress told us that the half order was 12 ounces of gravy, and the full was 32 ounces of gravy. Both our jaws dropped before we went with the quarter portion. I don't even like biscuits and gravy, to be honest. So a half order of gravy at this place would have been up to about here. So that much gravy. It's like a big bowl of gravy. The 32 ounces, like the full order of gravy, would be more than what's in this bowl. So this has 600 milliliter capacity in it. The full order of gravy is about 950 milliliters. So this and a half, like 1.5 of these bowls. That's insane. Other than breakfast, all we really did was walk across a huge bridge to the non-historic side of Wickenburg, in parentheses, Taco Bell, McDonald's, Ford dealership, nothing exciting, and relax in the hotel room where Eric watched the Ravens beat the Steelers, and I spent hours playing with my new phone. I had a new smartphone. I had a smartphone for the first time. So the next day, we went to the local Mexican restaurant, which was fantastic, explored a Native American themed gift shop, went to an antique store, and then went out for lunch. So it was like, okay, I guess we're just gonna go out for every meal and go shopping because there's nothing else to do here. Apparently, the #1 thing to do in Wickenburg, based on our conversation with locals, is drive 4-wheelers around in the desert. So we spent a total of 4 days in Wickenburg, which severely threw off our plans. Luckily, all the stuff that we had booked before, we like sent sobby sad story emails to people, and we got most of our money back for that kind of stuff. We were so excited to just be back in the truck. So, and we didn't have much time. I remember we didn't leave until the afternoon because that's when the truck was finally ready. And that's when I forced Eric to go into the shop that had like nobody in it, but a really terrible country singer. I'm sorry. And it was a great way to end our time in Wickenburg. And I'm not sure if I made this clear, but Wickenburg is like actually a cowboy town. Like the top 2 employers are ranches, but there are like real cowboys in Wickenburg. So we got back on the road in the afternoon, so we had a couple hours to drive, and then we made it to Tucson in the evening. But along the way, I do remember at one point, Eric, he was talking to his mom on the phone while he was driving. I was sitting in the passenger seats. It was like, oh, it's been such a like breezy day today, no problem. So glad to be back on the road. And then there's a super loud bang and something hits the windshield and flies off the hood of the car, and I'm pretty sure I had a minor heart attack because I was just like So what happened is we hit a bird, or a bird hit us actually. It fell straight from the sky into our windshield. It didn't crack the windshield, which is great. That would have been nightmarish. Can't even imagine. But yeah, it was terrifying. So then we spent the night in Tucson. We did nothing exciting that night, and the next day we left for El Paso. I remember the scenery when we went from Tucson to El Paso was so different than what me or Eric are used to. But we had to drive through New Mexico to get there, and I remember New Mexico was like an incredibly boring state to drive through. I had this little stuffed Ewok thing at the time named Scrappy, and I remember in New Mexico I managed to find him a tiny sombrero to wear, and he still has it. Scrappy got a picture with an Australian koala at the Grand Canyon because there was a group of like Aussies there, and they had, for some reason, they also had a mini stuffed animal thing that they took pictures of in front of big stuff, I don't know. So that night we spent it in El Paso with Eric's brother. I remember we went to the Walmart and then went to sleep. So it was a very exciting night. And then the next day was Thanksgiving. So we actually spent Thanksgiving at a place called Cattleman's. It actually has its own like ranch and private zoo thing, like a petting zoo, I think. I remember when we drove up, there was a horse whose job it was to stand in the parking lot and greet people, basically. So we spent a total of 2 nights in El Paso. We had some really, really good food. All I remember about El Paso is that the city was like a little bit bleak. There weren't trees and there weren't like pretty cacti or anything. We did a lot of driving and eating, and the main things I noticed about that is that El Paso has some freaking delicious food, super fresh stuff, because there's all these ranches nearby, so the beef there is just like insane. And the drivers in El Paso are freaking terrifying. After 2 nights in El Paso, we headed out for Austin. We're finally getting the feeling that this trip is actually going to end someday soon. No offense to you desert rats, but Eric and I just aren't the biggest fans of deserts. The big skies and open spaces are great, but as soon as we started seeing trees, there was an obvious sense of relief in the truck. So I remember when we drove into Austin, like as soon as we drove in, I had this just feeling of like love for the city. I don't know how that's possible because I really don't feel that way very often. I just had good vibes. There's some ridiculously good craft food and craft beer in Austin. A lot of really, really good music, like a lot of music. And a lot of bars, like really fun bars. The people are super nice. It's not that expensive. I mean, you can spend a lot of money in Austin, but you can go pretty cheap too and still have a really awesome time. So I remember that evening we went out to this really nice Mexican place. The rest of the night we spent walking around 6th Street. So if you have ever heard of 6th Street, you know it's the party street of Austin. It's pretty like college agey, but there's actually quite a mix of people, and there's something for everybody. There's like rock, country, there's music that's meant for like people to get up and dance, like even partner dances. There was a punk bar, like everything you could want music and bar wise you can get on 6th Street. And I remember after a certain point in the evening they actually blocked it off to traffic to make the road safer. So I thought that was kind of cool because the way it works is the bars actually will leave their windows and doors like wide open. So there's music flooding the whole street, and open container rules are pretty loose there, but we had a really, really fun time. Austin did not feel like any other city in Texas, that's for sure. So we had a very late night, and we got up very early and made a long drive to New Orleans. Eric had never been to New Orleans. I had been there once before for a volunteer trip, and at the time I wasn't 21, so I had seen Bourbon Street and seen what it looked like, but I hadn't been able to go because I couldn't drink. And so I was like, Eric, we gotta go to Bourbon Street. I just got a good feeling about this. So we got to our hotel. We actually stayed at a really shitty Motel 6 outside the city, and then I remember we took one of the most terrifying cab rides of my life. Although now looking back, I bet it isn't anymore now that I've like taken cabs around Asia. So we made reservations at a restaurant that was like really local New Orleans food, and we had a conversation with the hotel front desk. And between the two of them, we got the vibe that like Bourbon Street was going to be really busy. And they were like, why are you going to Bourbon Street? Are you guys going for the game? And we're like, what game? Apparently, there was a big college football game at the Superdome. I think it was the Bayou Classic between the Grambling State University Tigers and the Southern University Jaguars. We started with dinner at a Cajun/Creole restaurant where we had crab legs, fried rabbit, and jambalaya. After dinner, we headed straight for Bourbon Street. On the 2-minute walk, we witnessed one girl get arrested and try to escape from the cops, and another girl vomiting, so we started getting a better idea of where our night was headed. But nothing could have prepared us for what we experienced. I don't really know how to describe the rest of our night to you, but I'll try. When we first got to Bourbon Street around 10 p.m., there were so many people we could hardly move, and almost everyone had a drink in their hand. It was pretty obvious that the party had started early in the afternoon and we needed to hurry up and get a drink. And it was kind of funny because Eric and I are both from super white, like small towns, and New Orleans is obviously like more diverse than that. This particular football game is a historically black competition, so pretty much like everybody on the street was black. And so Eric and I being like two random white people not knowing what was happening was such an interesting experience, and we had so much fun. I remember we came across this bar called the Bourbon Cowboy, and it was literally all white people inside. They had a balcony and it was all just lined with white people holding drinks, being quiet. We walked into a random bar, ordered margaritas in plastic cups, and joined the party. Just walking back and down Bourbon Street and taking it all in. And we went to a convenience store and we got some drinks from there, and we just walked around with them because the open container law in New Orleans is basically just that your label on your container can't be showing. The rest of the night was spent popping bottles open on windowsill ledges in front of cops on horses, striking up short conversations with strangers, people watching, silly dancing. Definitely one of the most fun nights we've ever spent together. We had like an insanely good time. I'm kind of wrapping this up here now because the next night was just spent in a random town in Alabama, and then the next day we arrived in North Carolina. But we had one more just little extra surprise, like a little cherry on top for the road trip. We spent the night, and then when we woke up at Eric's parents' house, his dad was like, so what happened to the tire in the U-Haul trailer? We were like, what? The tire was completely gone. It must not have been off for that long, but we literally have no idea when it came off, and no guesses either. But then the trip was nice and done. That's what was nice about it. It was done. It was a long trip. Originally we were supposed to leave on the 15th and arrive on the 22nd, and we ended up not arriving until the 26th. So we had 4 extra days and a lot of random crap happened, and it was kind of a nightmarish trip, but it was, we had a really, really good time at the Grand Canyon. We had a good time in El Paso with Eric's brother. We had a good time in Austin. We had a good time in New Orleans. Nothing went according to plan, but it was still amazing. I'm so thankful we ended up going on that trip, because I realized that no matter what ended up in this road trip, if we were able to come out of it a stronger couple, that we were probably going to get married someday. And we did come out of it stronger, and we are married now. So everything worked out. So I hope you enjoyed Travel Tales with Lauren. I'm not with you. I've talked for almost a solid hour, so I'm gonna go edit this now. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye!